Hello, everybody, and welcome to this Wednesday, July 28th, episode 3 of the Traumaplicity, which is trauma plus simplicity equals Traumaplicity talk show. Today, I have Taneshia Elam-Snowden, one of my colleagues and good friends for over, 5 or 6 years now. And so she's going to be talking about her journey with trauma recovery and taking one tidbit of her journey and being able to break it down for you. So welcome, Taneshia. Thanks for being here.
Hi, hello, glad to be here.
That's good. So, Taneshia, can you share with us a part of your journey or perhaps what you know about trauma recovery?
So this is a very loaded question. So what I know about trauma is really predicated on personal experiences as well as work that I've done in research. I am a doctoral student, basically ABD at this point. So about to start working on dissertation. And a lot of the work that I've done has been dealing with trauma as it relates to students really looking at the defining what trauma is, what it does to the brain, how it impacts with daily functioning, and really walking through the healing journey of it. But what is interesting to note is my personal story, how I have overcome and dealt with trauma. I did all those things before I even knew the language around it. So that's just kind of giving you like a little synopsis of how trauma has worked in my personal life.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I love that you shared about your understanding, right? You didn't have the language or perhaps the vocabulary before you went through the process. I can totally relate to that. And then you learned about it. So now you have a different handle from experience and from, right, what the science and research says, which is really dynamic. And so I know that it is a loaded question, but is there one part of your trauma journey that stands out that you'd be willing to share perhaps a bit about, and then some simple, right? Because we want to take the simple out of the complex. We know it's a journey with trauma and it looks different for each person, but perhaps some simple steps that we can take today, right? That practicality in the journey. So I'd love to hear part of your story or part of what you want to share.
Sure thing. So my my parents were married probably 7 or 8 years before I was born, and by the time I'm old enough to remember it, I don't ever remember my father living in the home with me. I just remember he visited every weekend. So to me, that was a norm. It would be me and my mom during the week. My dad would come on the weekends. They were married. They would, share the same room and hang out with each other. And again, that was my norm. But there was often a lot of turbulence in their relationship where when they would be together for too long of a period of time, there would be this issue where there would be like these arguments and things that would go on, and I didn't understand what they were. So what occurred for so this occurred on and on from as early as I can remember, maybe around 2 years old, when I could remember, all the way up till I was about 6 years old. And one of the reoccurring themes would be my father would come at the end of the year and would talk about how he missed his family. He wanted to move home and be home with the family. And my mother would get frustrated. He would make me, grandiose promises that he was going to do specific things. It could be, for a kid, a grandiose promise is we're going to go, to the to park and feed the ducks, whatever the case may be. And for me as a child, my father was like a hero. He could do no wrong. He was the greatest person in the whole wide world. On a particular day, and there are multiple instances that have occurred before this to kind of lead up to this. On a particular day, I think it was like we were heading towards, it was Christmas, heading towards New Year's. He had been with us for 2 or 3 days. My grandmother, my maternal grandmother, was with us, and he got into a heated discussion with my mom. And it was probably about us being a family, him staying, that was the ongoing, um, theme. And he tried to, they didn't necessarily do it in front of me, but you could hear the aftermath coming out to the room that I was in. And so that my grandmother, he tried to get my grandmother's attention to kind of be on his side about it. And my grandmother, she wouldn't get involved. And so, long story short, um, my father was like, he was going to leave. I don't know why I was aware of him leaving at that time was different than other times.
Mm-hmm.
But he said he was going to leave, and he was like, "I'm gonna be back." I don't remember all the details because I'm a young kid, but I knew at that moment he was not going to return.
Mm-hmm.
I cried so deeply, I wept, and I grabbed my arms around his leg and I said, "Please, please." I pleaded with him to stay, and he pulled my arms off of him and left. And
Mm-hmm.
after that time, I didn't see him again for 3 years. I remember my mother weeping in the kitchen. I remember my grandmother being really, really upset. And they didn't want me to see them, but I saw them. And something happened for me. It just shifted. Because there were a lot of other broken promises and other things that my father did that were maladaptive in the relationship. But that moment was it was the trigger moment from where I dealt with this ongoing fear of rejection and people leaving that went all the way into my childhood. I mean, to adulthood.
Well, thanks for sharing this, and I appreciate it's vulnerable and, sharing about your personal childhood and how, that relationship with your father, right? Those like promises that you said that were grandiose or things that happened that were really part of that rejection and abandonment where it was hard to trust people, right? Especially when you're younger and especially at that one moment where you said, you were clinging to him, right? And he still left, and then you didn't see him for 3 years. That's right, a big impact. And when you saw him again, how did you have any feelings with that?
I turned them off. It was like a switch. So I
Mm-hmm.
didn't deal with it. So I was very cold. And keep in mind, I saw him in 3 years, but then I saw him in 3 year intervals after that. So it was every 3 years, every 3 years, every 3 years. So the point of when I graduated from high school, my father thought that I graduated a year after he realized that I was 19. He thought that I
Mm-hmm.
was graduating that year, and I'm like, "Dad, I'm in college." He had no, awareness, and so it kind of made me dead,
Mm-hmm.
dead to being close in relationships, dead to trusting. Because remember, I'm just giving you the climax
Mm-hmm.
of what when I'm able to recognize that I was traumatized. It was so many things that happened in between that led up to this one moment that in order for me to survive, I felt like I needed to avoid loving, feeling, caring, dealing with it at all. And
Mm-hmm.
so I cut it off.
Yeah, and that's really hard. And again, I know you said you're giving a synopsis of that, but right, like even not knowing the timing and you're in college and just that disconnect, right, can be so heartbreaking, especially with that father-daughter relationship, right? And we see that a lot, right? We know from just different research or kids, there's a lot of right, mother relationships that may not be what we hope they could be. And so I'm just curious, in your journey, what were some simple steps in your journey where you said, okay, I was numb, right? You kind of shut yourself out for some years, really didn't know the impact on your life. What were some awakening moments where you're like, wow, this really has devastated my heart? Like when did that occur for you?
So I'm married really early, like 21, turning 22. And I am, you know, 6 or 7 years in the relationship, really, driven and passionate about having this ideal family, right? This one that I did not have or see with my mother and my father, even though my mother desired it. She was like a really, really amazing, sort of a wife and supporting figure. So I learned a lot of those skills, about like how to be a great parent, how to, be engaged and all those things. So I'm married and I'm creating this, I have this narrative in my head that I'm unaware of what needs to occur. But my husband at the time, and he's still my husband, so I'll make it seem like we're not married anymore. But my husband at that time in our relationship um, was really driven about building his career. And
Mhm.
so he would work a lot of hours. And I I would say something to him about it. And, he thought that I was being unreasonable. And it got to the point where I started realizing, I started having like anxiety. I didn't have the language to know that's what it was, but I
Mm-hmm.
would be anxious, always trying to control everything in that environment because I needed our relationship to mirror something different than what I saw growing up. And I was so panicky and fearful that I was ready to leave my marriage on the strength of not wanting to be left first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so everything was about, I don't want you to leave me. So when he would go to work or when he would choose to do different things or to build his career, I felt like he was choosing those things over me. And in that same way, I was reliving it in
Mm-hmm.
my marriage and in my relationship where they were two different instances. And
Mm-hmm.
at this time, I'm going to school really slowly because at this time I have my son. He's probably 1 or 2, and I'm starting to really, be very prayerful. And all of a sudden I realized, the Lord began to show me that I was sort of looking at my husband like my father.
Mm-hmm.
And it kept coming up in an argument because my dad did this and my dad did this. He was like, I'm not your father. Like, I didn't do that. And it's not fair that you're holding me to this standard and I didn't even do these things. And I hated, my insides cringed hearing him say it, because I was like, what do you mean? Sort of a thing. And as it continued to happen over some time, I started realizing, okay, while I don't agree with what's going on or how maybe my husband is handling work, because I feel like they're taking advantage of him, I, I can't control him. There's definitely something going on with me. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
reacting in a way that's well above what it should be, and I don't know why. So it took me on a journey of really seeking the Lord to find out what was going on with me.
That's really good. Yeah. And thank you for sharing that. So your realization was, wow, like here is that little girl, right? Wanting her father. And a lot of times when we're younger, right, our father is really our first understanding of love. Our father is our first understanding of safety, right? Or having that ongoing consistency. And we don't realize how that can be projected, right, into other relationships until that happens. So obviously you had that shift. And so what were some maybe 3 to 5 simple steps, right? Like we know that there's a journey and trauma can be vary and there is a process of healing, but simple steps that you started to take to help you, right, understand like where you are, like maybe a simple step in like knowing that you don't have to control the situation, right, or like some things that you did to help you shift that response.
So one of the things that the very first thing was being able to acknowledge that my behaviors were not normal and that I was treating my current life, or judging my current life, um, based on a previous experience.
Mm-hmm.
So the acknowledgement that there was an error there was the very first step to my journey. Because once I recognized that and really processed it, I came to a resolve. I don't want to be like this.
Mm-hmm.
So then after coming to that acknowledgement, the second step was, being ready to go through the process and to face, relive or be exposed, incrementally to those experiences that made the trauma. Because while I always focused on, that moment when my father left in so many ways before that one. I realized I needed to go back and revisit those moments, feel them again, so that I could heal. And I began to feel them again, process them again, and I journaled through that journey. Um, and then after I was able to actually, process, so I acknowledged it. I was willing to face it. Um, I journaled through it. And then that was a journey over time. And as I began to journal through it, process through it with prayer, I started coming out of it little by little. And after I was able to really look at the thing from an aerial view,
Mm-hmm.
I was able to recognize that my father did the best that he could
Mm-hmm.
with the resources that he had available to him. And the same feelings that I was experiencing from him, he had experienced from his father, and he had experienced from the death of his mother at birth and not being treated well as an orphan child, all of
Mm-hmm.
those sort of things. So compassion came over me. And so that compassion helped me to walk into the next step, which was forgiveness. And then really walking through the forgiveness journey with him, I was actually able to talk to him before he passed away, and we talked through some of these things. So I was able to process things with him to get a level of resolve. And I know that that's a blessing because you don't always get an
Mm-hmm.
opportunity to do that with people. But
Yeah.
I did have a moment to have a conversation. And then leaving that, I was actually able to then, after having resolved that initial piece, then I was able to start dealing with every other area in my life
Mm-hmm.
where these same feelings and behaviors had fostered maladaptive relationships with others.
Mm-hmm. It's
And I
great.
started working on that. And it's still a process where I
Mm-hmm.
am shedding all of those negative things because I'm in a different place. All those relationships that were brought on or maintained out of a fear of being left. It's a shedding process. And it's been
Great.
years.
Absolutely. Thank you. So I like how you said you identified you wanted a new response. You really had to then face it, right? Thinking about where are the responses? Where's that pain coming from? Journaling, spent a lot of years journaling. And then you did say you were able to then shift your response over time as you went through and getting to the roots, but also had opportunity to have compassion for your dad and realize and understand the generational trauma that happens and responses. So again, if our people are listening, to Taneshia's story. She was talking about an incident, right, with her dad, and just how that impacted her life and relationship. So, Tanesha, if there is someone going through that right now, maybe the beginning process, what's one thing you would say to them?
Be kind to yourself. It is a journey. Some days you'll be really, really great at feeling comfortable to face what you have not faced in the past because it's scary. Because in many instances, you kind of have to go into that journey alone. You want people to come with you, but you have to go back into that space. And if you feel uncomfortable, sometimes going to those deep dives, it's okay to take a break. Be kind to yourself. Recognize that, you know, if we were eating an elephant, elephants are very large. How do you eat them? One bite at a time. So take your journey of healing one day at a time and be kind to yourself.
Well, thank you, Tanisha. Yeah. So taking the journey one simple step at a time, right? One thing, even if it's just one different response each day. And so I appreciate your time. If you are listening in, just know that we support you, that yes, one step at a time, just as you said about the elephant. And so know that Traumaplicity is going to be showing every week at 8 o'clock. So we're pre-recording this one, and you'll have different people on. And it's really about community and understanding different people's journeys that you can understand. If you're just listening and you haven't had this, everybody has some level, but if you have had different types of journeys, you may relate and get one wisdom nugget or many. So thank you so much, Tanesha, for your time. Take care, everybody. Be well, and I'll see you next week for episode 4. All right.
Bye, guys.
Bye.